Hello and welcome back to another episode of Armchair Analysts, the only podcast that shed a tear into their pints of wine as West Brom guaranteed their relegation on the weekend. My name is Rupert Meadows and I've written and broadcasted about all things football on platforms such as TalkSport Radio and Give Me Sport. My co-host Cameron MacDonald has spent the last 3 years working as an FA licensed intermediary here in the UK. But above all else, we're fans.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rupert. You didn't need to hit me right in the emotions with that Sam Allardyce tribute there. The European semi-finals wrapped up over last week, and we have an all-English Champions League final to look forward to for the second time in 3 years. In the Europa League, Manchester United progressed where Arsenal did not, and will now have to beat Unai Emery's Villarreal to secure their first piece of silverware under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Starting us off, though, with the 2020-21 edition of the Premier League coming to a close, we've both picked our respective teams of the season. As always, timestamps are in the description, and I think a good place to start off would be, before we say our first player, discussing what criteria we think entitles a player to a spot in our team. Because I know that, me being me and you being you, there's going to be some big omissions and some inclusions that people might not agree with. So, for me, when I'm looking to pick out my team this season, I'm not just looking for good players, but two of the things I'm really looking for are players that have really made a mark this season in terms of how they've affected their team and in terms of how long they've been doing that for their team. So for that reason, there are quite a few players that I've left out because they either haven't been exceptional. Sorry, not because they haven't been exceptional, but because they haven't even played that many games, or because as good as they've been, it's not been their performances that have elevated the team they play for. So as an example of the former, a player who's been really, really good, that's not made it for me, I say I have left out Jesse Lingard, because he's been really, really good, maybe had the best run of form of any player this season, but it's happened for about 12 games. It's all happened really late in the day, and I wouldn't put him in compared to some of the other people that have made the cut. As an example of the latter, Phil Foden has also not made my team, not because he hasn't been absolutely fantastic when he's played, but partly because he hasn't played as much as some other players, but also when you look at Phil Foden relative to Man City, it's not Phil Foden that's given Man City a good season. He's won them some games, but equally, Man City have had plenty of games where Phil Foden hasn't even been on the pitch, and they haven't really missed his presence. So that, for me, has sort of meant that players of that ilk haven't quite made it, despite how good their seasons might have been. I also, looking at it, want to have a bit of a balanced 11. It's quite funny. Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher had a little bit of a back and forth on this about whether your 11 needs to be balanced. And, to you, Rupert, or anyone listening, if when you build your teams of the season, it's a 4-5-1 with 5 number 10s in midfield, hey, go nuts. You know what? It's a bit of fun. But personally, I've decided to go for at least an 11 that would make sense taken to the pitch. And that, again, has sort of influenced which players have made it and some players that have maybe not quite made it because their place has been taken by someone else.
Yeah, very fair. I think good to set out the stalls early on with how we are choosing our teams. I've gone, I would say, broadly with the same approach to you in that, I'm looking at the best individual performances. I've tried to be balanced in terms of the player profile and also in terms of how much I think they've affected the fortunes of their team as an individual. I think probably we might have a couple of overlaps, but I think also what's nice about that is that it opens up the conversation to more than just kind of the top two teams and means that we can discuss, a lot of other sides that maybe haven't finished at the very top of the table, but have had some real standout performances. It also maybe means that we avoid some of the boringness of like Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville's teams, for example, which had about, collectively like 15 Man City players and like the rest, half of them were Man U players.
Well, that's the fun of the exercise, isn't it? Because when someone says, what's the team of the season? I suppose one acceptable answer would just be go, Man City. But there's no real fun in building that team because someone else has already done it. For
sure, yeah. And don't get me wrong, a couple of Man City players have made it into my side. But, I definitely have tried to do along the same lines as you. I think that's what the fun in the conversation is anyway.
Yeah, I think so. Do you want to talk about what formation you've gone with first, or do you want to work that out over the course of the conversation? I personally have gone for a 4-2-3-1. What about yourself?
Fair enough. Yeah, so the one thing I would say that differs with my team is that I do have one slightly sketchy positioning. One player is just out of position. But he's a player that can handle it, I think, so I'm going to hide behind that. I'm going to go for a 4-3-2-1.
Okay, very nice. The way we've seen Chelsea lining up a lot like that. So starting off in goal, my goalkeeper that I've gone for me, was maybe the easiest pick that I made. It's got to be Emiliano Martinez of Aston Villa. He is maybe not the best keeper in terms of raw ability. I think Ederson and Alisson are still a little bit better than him, but in terms of performances this season, I think he's been the best keeper in the league. I think all you need to do is look at how much Villa have changed since last season, and there's a few things that have influenced that. Obviously, Ollie Watkins coming in has been huge. Obviously, Jack Grealish not having to do all the legwork himself has been huge. But just defensively, I mean, Villa for a huge portion of the season have had the second or the best defensive record in the league, and even now, Emi Martinez is only bettered in terms of clean sheets by Ederson and Edouard Mendy. And that's not to say that, I mean, I think they, at least Ederson is a better keeper, but they both play for the two best defensive sides in the league. So if Martinez was also playing for Chelsea or City, the two best defensive sides, he might have an even better clean sheet record than them. I think he's also, beyond just a great shot stopper, he does have the best shots per save ratio in the league, but he's also really, really good at marshalling a defence. One of the other things that I think about when I think about how much Villa have improved defensively is how their main centre-back partnership is basically the same as it was last season, Konsa and Mings, who I have a lot of appreciation for, but have come on leaps and bounds, having that sort of third member of the centre-back trio, marshalling the defence and making it all work. So I think Martinez, for me, has been just exceptional, and Villa are rubbing their hands that they got him for so cheap.
They sure are, yeah. I think it was a fairly easy pick in the end, but there was one player that ran Martinez close, which was Nick Pope, who is obviously going to be the most obvious player to compare him to, because he also comes from a team that is not in the top 4, top 5, 6 teams, and they've actually got some quite similar statistics. They've both got almost exactly the same save percentage rates. Weirdly, Nick Pope has actually conceded fewer goals this season, which was a statistic that surprised me. But for me, it was Martinez's distribution that was just that bit better than Nick Pope's. And also, as you mentioned, just the impact that he's had on the team this season to kind of really put Aston Villa in contention for, being in the top half of the table. So, I've actually gone for Martinez as well.
Yeah, that's the thing, I think, with Nick Pope and Martinez, is like Nick Pope has had a fantastic season and has been great, but I think you look at, for me anyway, Martinez has sort of given Villa that extra boost more of like a few places, whereas Nick Pope, as good as he's been, hasn't been able to completely save Burnley from themselves. They're not in relegation form or anything, but they still have had some games where they've thrown a lot over their shoulders. Yeah,
exactly, and I think, if you look at Aston Villa, they've had an amazing season, definitely compared to last season. And part of what I was thinking of when I wanted to build this team is that I want those sides to be recognised, and it's realistic. It's got to be Martinez or maybe Jack Grealish if you want to try and capture what was really special about Villa this season. And not only was Martinez kind of the mainstay of the team in that Jack Grealish was missing from injury for about 10, 12 games, but also the midfield and the attack is so stacked for this side that I thought Martinez was definitely the easier one to fit in.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree. Looking at left back, I wonder if we're going to agree here as well. This is a player who, as I was building this team, I found that there were a lot of players that have caught flack from me, either on the podcast or just in my general life in the past. And, maybe that's just, that loads of people have turned around this season, but to be fair, I've had to go with Luke Shaw. Luke Shaw, we've consistently roasted on the podcast for his enjoyment of, of no exercise and eating the burgers. But, after years of not doing it, not living up to the expectations, he's absolutely hit the expectations that I think United fans were finally expecting him when they bought him. We've finally got to see what he's all about. He's been absolutely lethal going forwards, which is always, you need that as a modern fullback. But where he differs is that he's actually been really responsible at the back. There's so many fullbacks you look at in this modern game that can do it all and get everyone really excited for a while. I'm thinking of players like Hector Bellerin when he came through. I'm thinking of Benjamin Monzi when he first arrived. I'm even thinking to a degree of Trent Alexander-Arnold, who absolutely dazzle everyone because they can bomb forwards and put in a cross, but then when they get challenged by a particularly tricky winger, it's like, uh-oh. And I don't think Luke Shaw has that. He's been equal to a lot of the challenges he's faced this season, and is just really, really good defensively. I think, it's equally impressive given that we all assumed he was going to be sidelined this season. When Manchester United signed Alex Telles, we thought, all right, that's the last we've seen of Luke Shaw. It was an interesting experiment, but he's going to fall by the wayside. He's actually taken that as the motivation to crack on and dropped numerous world-class performances. And I don't use that lightly. I think, honestly, world-class is about right, because there have been points this season when I've been thinking, how many left-backs are better than Luke Shaw currently, or have been better than Luke Shaw this season worldwide?
Well, it's a good question, and I think you could definitely make the argument that Luke Shaw on his day is as good as anyone. I think he's going to have to do it for a little longer period of time for me to be comfortable with calling him world class. But yes, world class performances, absolutely. I have gone for Luke Shaw as well. I'm hoping that there's going to be some diversity later on, but definitely left back was where I kind of first came unstuck because there have been so many standout performances at left back this season. I mean, Stuart Dallas, Aaron Cresswell, Luca Digne, all deserve merit and conversation, but looking at the statistics, like the more you break them down, the more Luke Shaw does stand out as being the most balanced of those, as you said, from both going forwards. He's got great passing and crossing numbers, but he also has one of the highest percentages of tackles for people trying to dribble past him. So just a bit of a rock at the back, and also someone that can contribute going forward. So yeah, he unavoidable. You had to go for him.
I also think the other thing that I didn't completely explicitly mention there is how important Luke Shaw's performance this season has been for the player that plays on the left wing for Manchester United, which obviously changed a bit, but most notably Marcus Rashford this season. I think a huge amount of why Marcus Rashford has had a good season is because Luke Shaw has been there, not only providing defensive cover so that Marcus Rashford doesn't have to worry about, his six, but also great overlapping runs and great passes forwards to find him in space. So yeah, I think he does all of that, offers his own sort of defensive and attacking prowess, but also brings up that player who's on the left flank with him, which has been huge for United this season.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's the kind of partnership that makes me wonder whether or not they could occupy the left flank of the England side. So I fully agree with you there.
Very good point. Very good point. Maybe we'll see that.
Maybe indeed.
Looking at the first centre-back, I think this is someone you'll probably also have, because I think that realistically this has been the centre-back of the season, and that's Ruben Dias. Man City in general have just been an absolute unit at the back this season. Normally they're pretty impressive just in terms of football performance, but they've often had that sort of sense of leakiness to them. And everyone has a little bit this season, but I think that makes it all the more impressive that City for ages just managed to keep so many games to nil. Even remember the sort of first 8 weeks of the season, and it was like you'd have 2 7-goal thrillers a week. He's just come in, again, like I just mentioned, Luke Shaw there and Martinez before him. He's not just come in with individual brilliance, but he's made all the players around him look miles better. John Stones, remember all the question marks over him up until now in his career? And now he looks like the second or third best centre-back in the league just because he's playing in that duo with Ruben Dias. I think it's just so impressive given that he's come in from a different league. He's jumped straight in, it's taken him no time. And I think it's just been really key in taking the City side to the next level, which, now that they're in the Champions League final, they are.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Diaz is like one of the first names on this team. I'd say definitely top 3. He's just been an absolute rock at the back, and City have looked like so much the stronger team for his presence. So yeah, couldn't agree more. Diaz makes it.
I think it's to the point where oftentimes centre-backs almost get overlooked in a sense, but then every now and again you get one who is so good. The immediate comparison that jumps to my mind, which is just a very obvious one, but it's just the importance of Virgil van Dijk to that Liverpool side. You get in one really, really important player and just see what it changes. And just as we've seen with Liverpool this season when they've lost Van Dijk, one really, really good imperious centre-back who has those leadership qualities, who has that aerial dominance, can just kick you on, and they may now win the Champions League for the first time ever.
They may well. Yeah, I mean, he's barely put a foot wrong this season, and his numbers are also just ludicrous. Like, I think they've only lost one game that he started. They've only conceded like 10 goals. So, yeah, he's just been an absolute weapon in defence. I'm hoping that this next position is one that we differ on, and that's because it's my rogue player. I've gone rogue, and my second centre-back is Stuart Dallas.
Okay, interesting.
Now, the reason I picked... Sorry, go on.
No, sorry, I was going to say, but walk me through your decision to play Stuart Dallas centre-back. Not that I think he couldn't.
All right, so the main reason was, I was looking at the statistics for this left-back comparison that I was making, and Dallas has just had such an impressive season. 8 goals, 2 assists. He's got, in the 80s for passing accuracy. He's played every single game for Leeds. He absolutely smashes the statistics for tackles and interceptions, and he's just been such a mainstay of Leeds' season. And also, I feel like he's been the catalyst for so many of their heroic, famous victories, most notably recently being Man City and Man U. He had unbelievable games. He also scored against Tottenham on the weekend, and I just think that he kind of encapsulates everything that's been good about Leeds this season, because you just don't see him coming. He's played literally everywhere on the pitch. He's played at left back, left mid, right mid, centre mid, CDM, and oftentimes he's like the furthest player up from the pitch. Quite a few of his goals have been kind of passes in behind the defence, and he's broken away with it. Let alone, he's not like a defender that just scores from corners. So I really wanted to fit him in the team, and there was no second centre-back that really blew me away statistics-wise and my impression-wise. So based on his, range of play and his flexibility, I've hoped ambitiously that I can just slip him in, and you won't argue too much with me about having him as centre-back number 2.
No, I think he could fit in that position. For my second centre-back, I have gone for the player that I actually do think was the second best centre-back in the league. We were saying if Ruben Dias and maybe John Stones is second or third, I actually think this player has been even better than John Stones, better than Harry Maguire, all these other big names. And that's the young lad that came from France, Wesley Fofana. And I just think about how Leicester, at the start of this season, everyone looked at them as a team and thought that all those injuries were going to really hurt them. They weren't going to be able to put together a challenge. Soyuncu was out for a long time, and Pereira was out for a while as well. And they had these young players, James Justin and Wesley Fofana, step up. And Fofana now has shown everyone why he should be their first choice. He has been absolutely insanely mature for a 19-year-old. His judgment of the game is fantastic. Like I said, he'd be my centre-back of the season if it wasn't for Ruben Dias, which is just crazy to say of a player that young, but he's just more than earned that sort of consideration. When you look at how Leicester have done this season as well, in terms of defensive aptitude, they're in the FA Cup final, top 4 seems pretty likely, and he's just going to keep getting better and has continued to get better over the course of the season. I've just been so impressed every time I've watched him play. He's one of those players that I like watching, and I just look forward to seeing how good he gets down the line. And it'll be interesting at some point when Leicester sell him for like 140 million to Man City and buy an even better Fofana down the line for like 3 million.
Yeah, I mean, he's been absolutely unbelievable. I think I really liked him this season as well. I wanted to fit him in. I slightly hesitated just because he also has had a little bit of an injury break, he only played 24 games so far this season, but completely agree that his impact on Leicester's season has been incredibly impressive for how old he is, and he just seems like the whole package. He's great at he's great in the air. He's got good passing, and he really does have kind of the defensive skills down. He's great at intercepting. He's a good reader of the game. I agree with you. It is unbelievable how Leicester's revolving door of talent just continues to like one up itself. It's baffling.
Every time, yeah. For my right back, I have gone for a player that you've already said, except for in the position that he actually plays. That's right, I've also put Stuart Dallas in my 11.
Well played.
And my whole rhetoric, I didn't know you were going to jump the gun, but my rhetoric was, I was sort of going to go down the line of sort of how a month ago when everyone was sort of talking about the Euros, Jamie Carragher made a really impassioned plea for Trent Alexander-Arnold to be in the squad because he thought that Trent Alexander-Arnold is so good on the ball that he can play at right back or in the midfield. Then when we had the Hall of Fame discussion a couple of weeks ago, Carragher came out again, this time with a sort of inverted argument arguing for Steven Gerrard, and his argument this time was that Steven Gerrard was so good in midfield and defensively, he could have played at right back. What then is my question of a player who has played at right back and has played at midfield, and as you mentioned, in addition to that, has played at left back, left mid, right mid, attacking mid. He's just done it all really this season, and I think when you think of Leeds at the moment, you think of Stuart Dallas. We talk about how managers' systems can sometimes be encapsulated by a player, and it's so funny to me that when it was at Chile, it was Arturo Vidal, who's like one of the most recognised and famous midfielders in the world. And Stuart Dallas, just this humble bloke has just come out of nowhere and it's like, yeah, I'm basically the Northern Irish Arturo Vidal. I can do it all too. And I think, he just excels in every position. I was looking through the numbers and he's played, I think it's 18 games at left back, 8 games at right back, 10 games at attacking mid, 5 games on the right wing. He's literally had a good chunk of all of it, and in no game has he looked out of position in one of those positions. So for the same reason that I sort of agreed with you sort of putting him at centre-back, because I think, there's no reason he couldn't really do it, I've had to put him in my team because, firstly, if anyone listening, and including you, Rupert, thought I wasn't going to have a Leeds presence in my team this season, you're tapped in the head.
Laughing. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not going to argue with your decision to select Dallas. And yeah, agreed. He just is Leeds, Mr. Leeds this season. Not that they haven't had a couple of Mr. Leedses. I would say, obviously Patrick Bamford's the other main one, and Rafinha as well has dominated, but. Yeah, Stuart Dallas is just... I think the reason why he is the quintessential Leeds player is because he just has this rogue element about him. He could just be anywhere at any time.
Yeah, and is usually anywhere at any time, which is just... And obviously Patrick Bamford's had a really good season. Stuart Dallas is their second top scorer. For a guy that's played over half the season in one of the fullback positions, that's insane.
Yeah, incredibly impressive.
And as you mentioned as well, and this has been something that's been quite important for me, especially when we talk about maybe some of the players that I've left out, a lot of the goals that he has scored have been really crucial to Leeds' seasons. Obviously, you've got, for example, the 2 against Man City or the goal against Tottenham last night. So a lot of these goals have not only been, oh, wow, Stuart Dallas has scored, it's, wow, Stuart Dallas has scored a winner.
For sure. Yeah. Absolute hero of a man. He is. I've gone for someone, again, that I just felt like has had too good a season to ignore. It's Joao Cancelo. And I don't think you're going to argue with me here, despite the fact that I do get what you're saying about how he maybe hasn't had the absolute presence to drag Man City up by their bootstraps throughout the season, but he has just been an absolute mainstay in this side, and he also has been asked to play in a number of different positions and has excelled in pretty much every one of them. Statistics wise, he is right at the very top of all kind of things you could look at in terms of not only like defenders with like pass accuracy and passes completed, dribbles, crosses. He's got I think he's got definitely a few assists. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. And man of the match performances. He's just been a real mainstay of Man City's title winning season. And I felt like he's been too good to leave out.
Yeah, and as you say, he's played at right back, he's filled it at left back. When they've played with sort of wing backs, he's shifted to those roles on either side as well. Definitely a real talent. And even, I don't have his assist off the top of my head either, but every time he is on the pitch, even if he's not getting an assist, he's just firing so many dangerous balls down that corridor of uncertainty that you're just sort of like, you would hate to play against that if you were a defender.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's only 3 assists, but again, as you said, it's not for the want of putting it in the wrong place. He definitely is just always a threat on whichever side he sits on. If he's on the left, he's got a great little cut in and hit it with his right, bending to the far post. And obviously he's also equally adept at hitting the byline and just putting balls in from the right. So yeah, just a really exciting player. And he's only 26, so I'm sure Premier League defences will be fearing him for years to come.
Also, you say 3 assists, which might not sound so impressive, but you've got to understand, Cancelo's coming from the right, which means when he crosses, the first person to get on the ball is usually Raheem Sterling.
Very true, and as we have discussed, the boy loves a good miss.
That should be about 17 assists, but Raheem Sterling's put 14 of them wide.
Exactly, yeah. So, on to the 3 in midfield. What was your formation again?
I went for a 4-2-3-1, so I'll start off with my pivot, and then you can build your 3 on midfield. For my first man in the pivot, I have gone for Declan Rice. Much like with Leicester, there's a few different West Ham players I consider for team of the season, because they've also just been, you look at the table, they're currently 5th, but they could still finish top 4. They've been one of the biggest surprise performers this year. But ultimately, I went with Declan Rice instead of Thomas Souček or Vladimir Coufal or Jarrod Bowen, because for a lot of the reasons that I went with Stuart Dallas, the team has been impressive, but Rice is perhaps the player that best sort of exemplifies the club in its current state. I think you can also see how important he's been more so than any other player by how West Ham's downwards turn in form recently has sort of coincided with Declan Rice getting injured against Arsenal and coming out. He's been one of the best ball winners in the league this season, and a big part of the reason why so many sides have struggled to get a foothold against West Ham, because they just haven't been able to string too many passes together. It's also a big part of the reason why Thomas Souček, who would be another one of the big shouts, has been able to sort of exercise that much attacking aggression from midfield, because he can just run off and go, you know, Declan, just stop any balls from crossing the halfway line, and they'll go, yep. I think you can literally look at West Ham's season results as Declan Rice gets injured. It was in the Arsenal game where they conceded 3, and they conceded 10 goals in the 4 games in that 4-game period. This is a team that had been pretty solid in a lot of games defensively, so I think to undersell him and his importance to that side would be a massive misreading of how important he is. So yeah, I think all that, he's just absolutely top. On top of that, his passing is fantastic as well. I was looking at a lot of West Ham goals and I was thinking about this, and if you look at a lot of West Ham goals and you literally just rewind them like 15 seconds, it all starts because Declan Rice has like picked up the ball somewhere, he's made like an incisive pass out to Cresswell or someone, or he's just found a way to unlock the passage of play. And I think for that reason, he's got that really nice... I talked about this when I talked about how I think he's the perfect player for Man United to sign. Just amazing ball winner. On top of that is a fantastic distributing defensive midfielder. And I think he would start for almost any team in the league.
Yeah, definitely agreed. I feel, well, I've gone for Thomas Souček, but I do actually agree with everything you've said, and I would be willing to maybe take on Declan Rice instead. The reason I've gone for Souček is because he's a little bit more of a mainstay in the team. He's played every single minute bar 1 this season, whereas old Dec has missed a couple through injury, and I just think his impact on all sides, all parts of the pitch has been so impressive, and he also has been a match winner on so many occasions, and he's got comfortably the most man of the match performances of any West Ham player, which is 5, which is seriously impressive for essentially a holding midfielder or a defensive minded midfielder, at least at the beginning of the season. And again, yeah, he does just, for me at least, when I think of West Ham's season, I am thinking of Mikel Antonio, I am thinking of Aaron Cresswell, but I'm thinking of Thomas Souček and his just amazing ability to arrive in the box and score important goals.
Yeah, I think that's bang on. Honestly, I've gone for Rice, but I sort of have the inverse of you. I would happily have either one, because I think they've sort of been two sides of the same coin. Declan Rice being the great ball winner and Thomas Souček being a really vital goal scorer, and that's why, in tandem they've been so effective.
Yeah, what are you saying? Moving on to my second, I'll go first. I'll go first this one.
Right.
I've got someone who I'm hoping. Well, I'm not hoping. I think you probably don't have on your side. And I've picked Yuri Tielemans.
Okay, interesting.
And the reason I've picked him is partly due to just profile, that he has been pretty much the only mainstay of Leicester's amazing season. And I say it's an amazing season because when you look at the amount of injuries that they've had and the way that they've been able to rotate new players in, like your Wesley Fofanas, and a lot of players have come in, like Harvey Barnes has come in and had an amazing time. Jamie Vardy's been great when he's been fit, and he's not missed too many games, but he has missed some. And Leicester have had to progress without him, but Castagne's missed games. Soyuncu's missed games, Maddison's missed games, Ndidi's missed games. They've been without almost every single one of their players, except for Yuri Tielemans, who's played every single game for them. And I think that he has massively stepped up his presence in midfield, because not only is he solid defensively, but he's really upped his game going forwards. And so often, again, like you mentioned with Declan Rice, kind of starting the attacks, so often Yuri Tielemans is at the heart of really everything that's been good about Leicester's season so far. And yeah, I've been so impressed with him and so impressed with Leicester to be able to keep churning out these consistent performances despite their massive amount of injuries that they've had, which I think at one point was like worse than Liverpool's.
Yeah, I think it's been really impressive, their ability to bounce back. I do also like how good Tielemans has been this season. I think he's been really impressive as that midfield three that I think has only lost like 2 or 3 games when they've all started together, of Maddison, Tielemans and Ndidi. And in that vein of thought, my second player in the midfield pivot is actually Wilfred Ndidi. I feel like
Nice.
we've just talked about it there. He did miss a little bit with injury, and I feel like it'd be redundant for me to call this player underrated on this podcast, because I think we've both talked plenty of times about how much we like him, how key he is to Leicester's system. Every time Leicester have suffered a major setback in terms of results, it's been because that midfield trio has been broken up in some form, and while Tielemans has been there the whole season, I feel like he's operated best with Ndidi, and of course vice versa. I think that despite the fact that he's had all his injuries, he's never come back and had to have a bit of time to get back into it. He's always come straight back in with a great game. He's got the most tackles per game of any player in the league, and he's also got the most interceptions per game of any player in the league. You're not getting the ball past him. Next to Rice in my midfield, no one's creating any chances. He's also really good at winning the ball in the air. He's another one that I think about every single team in the league, from Man City to Sheffield United, and I think, would they sign him if they could? 100%. I think he's an absolute asset, and you could argue maybe, I think he's played 28 games this season, so maybe that's not as effective as Tielemans. For me, that's enough. I was thinking more along the lines of players like, Lingard.
I think it's 24. I think he's had
24 starts, and then a few other games where he's come on back from injury, I think.
22 and one sub appearance.
Well, even so, I think
agreed.
It's over half. And also, it's like there are some players I've left out because they've not played enough because they haven't made the selection. Whereas injuries, for me, I've been slightly more sympathetic towards either way.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good distinction to make. And also, because of someone like Foden, he's just been rotated out a lot. Whereas whenever Ndidi has been able to play, he has played and he's put in, rock star performances in that heart of midfield. So yeah, he's just unbelievable player. Really, really immense in Leicester's midfield. You do just wonder almost. Obviously, Ndidi came in after Kante left, and Leicester have kind of just been able to carry on because of that. You do wonder kind of how they would be if they didn't have a player capable of almost being like the presence of two players in their side. Is that kind of the secret to their great success, is that they're able to cultivate these really impressive defensive midfielders?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, and I do think that when you look at partly because it's that midfield trio at the West Ham, but when you look at the times that Leicester have had, like games where they've lost, a couple of games consecutively, often it's been that Ndidi just got a hamstring thing 2 weeks before, so they had to play those games without him. So yeah, that's my midfield pivot, which allows me to have sort of 3 attacking, a left winger, a right winger, and a central attacking midfielder to go wild behind my striker.
Very nice. And I'm guessing that we've picked a similar player as an attacking midfielder.
I would assume that we've gone for at least one of the same, because for central attacking midfield, for me, he's played a lot as a number 8 this season. He's also played as a number 10 and even as a false 9. And that's, of course, Kevin De Bruyne. He's the best player in the league, playing for the best side in the league. I don't think you could have a team of the season this year without Kevin De Bruyne. He's one of those players that he's so good and he's been so good for so long that it's kind of difficult to know where to start talking about him without saying the obvious. We all know how ridiculously good he is on the ball. We all know how good he is at shooting from range and at set pieces, and the kind of vision that he has. Maybe the highest compliment that I could say about Kevin De Bruyne this season is that it's been the first year in 10 years that Man City haven't had David Silva at the club, and you just don't notice that.
It's a good point, yeah. And David Silva's been so important to them over the years, and the fact that De Bruyne's been able to, with the help of people like Gundogan, come in and just fill the void has been, super, super impressive. De Bruyne has also made my side. I've put him on the right flank of my inside wingers, just because I quite like him slightly further up, and I quite like him being on the right just so that he can whip in those balls that he's so good at into the box. But yeah, you can't really leave him out. I know he's only played 20 odd games, but those 20 odd games have just been unreal. I think in a third of his games he's been man of the match that he started, which is just ludicrous. And his goals and assists compared to how many games he's played is also just so impressive. And he really does typify Man City's strength.
Yeah, I just think, not to to oversimplify it, but I think it's just as simple as he's the best player in the league, arguably by quite a
Yeah,
distance.
you can't leave him out. Agreed.
So you have pulled in what your right forward. Have you finished your midfield, your three-man midfield?
I haven't, no. So the third player in my three-man midfield, who is the most attacking player in my midfield, is another player that, in my opinion, and I'm sure in the opinion of 99% of fans, it's hard to leave out. It's Bruno Fernandes.
Right, sure.
I mean, I don't even know how much I need to dispute this, but just had such an impactful season for Man U, and he's been at the heart of everything they've done that's been good, and he's been by far their most consistent performer. I think he's got 17 goals this season, which from attacking mid is incredibly impressive, and 11 assists as well. So yeah, it's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, definitely a very, very impressive player for Man United this season. He's actually missed out on making my team of the season, partly because of the formation I've decided to go with, and simply just unlucky to be playing in the same position as Kevin De Bruyne.
I'm sure he'll be gutted.
Yeah, exactly. But also just because, Bruno Fernandes has had an absolutely fantastic season. The numbers have dried up a little bit towards the back end. Like, did you know that he hasn't scored a goal from open play since February 14th? And he's chipped in with the penalties and stuff like that. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I mean, a big part of that has been because Mason Greenwood has come into the 11 a bit more. Cavani's come into the 11 a bit more. Rashford's been scoring a few more goals. But just in terms of the rhetoric of sort of Bruno Fernandes scores a lot of goals, a lot of the goals all of the goals he scores since February haven't been from open play. They've all been penalties, which is, a penalty is still a goal that's important. But just based on that and when I talked about how important a player to a team is, obviously Bruno Fernandes is basically the reason that United were doing so well for all of the first part of the season, and still the way he plays is really important. But I don't know if he's been the only guy in the last few months, because I think there have been a few other players that have come up and been quite impressive in tandem with him.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think the only thing that I feel like you might be missing out on there is that his contribution to the team is not defined just by his goals and his assists. He, I would say, has actually started to play slightly further back now that players are starting to come through, like Pogba, who likes to drive forwards, and like Greenwood. So I would say that drop off in goals and assists has also, at least in part, corresponded with him maybe starting to play the pass before the assist. And the other part of it is actually when you look at you break down the statistics of his defensive contribution, he is right at the very top of the league in terms of leading the line in defense and pressing opponents and harrying defenses and things like that. So he really has been a bundle of energy, and at times he really has just dragged Man U through matches and dominated games, not just with the ball at his feet. So I think that his importance to United's side can't be underestimated.
Oh, absolutely not. I'm not trying to argue for a second he hasn't had an absolutely fantastic season, but, that's my reasoning that he doesn't make it in ahead of Kevin De Bruyne.
I hear what you're saying.
Looking at my left winger, I've gone for Jack Grealish. Jack Grealish is another one who has been injured for a while, but despite being injured for the last 10 game weeks, he has the same amount of goals and assists this season as Kevin De Bruyne. Obviously, slightly different players. De Bruyne has been playing a little bit further back as an 8 sometimes, whereas Grealish has been sort of Villa's main attacking force, arguably even more so than Ollie Watkins. But I just think that as a statement of how important he is to Villa is just absolutely insane. I think, again, much like you look at Ndidi and some of the other players I've mentioned who have had injuries that have corresponded with it, Villa were looking like they might finish somewhere in the top 6, and then Jack Grealish got injured, and now they're down to 11th as it stands. And I think that just directly coincides with it. They've had a lot of other good players. Obviously, we talked about Martinez at the very start, but I think Jack Grealish has been the guy who makes the magic happen. I actually think up until he got injured in game week 26, had he kept it going at that same rate, he was in with a shout for player of the season, even more so than your Harry Kanes and your Ruben Dias. It's just because the way he played every week, given the context of doing it with Villa, was just insane. And he's one of those players that just sort of reminds you why you love football. The amount of times I'll just watch a match just to watch Jack Grealish play, especially this season, has been countless. And I just think, were it not for the injury, we could have seen something unbelievably good, even despite the injury we have.
Yeah, again, hard to argue with that. I think He's had an unbelievable season. He's an unbelievable player. I think that I haven't put him in my side just for the reason that he did get injured. And, a lot of what you were talking about was that, if he had stayed fit, he would have having such an amazing season. And I agree with that. And yes, his numbers are still incredibly impressive despite that. But I just kind of felt that you're right in terms of Aston Villa's season taking a downturn when he gets injured, of course. But also, when he did get injured, and he hasn't played since the middle of February, and since then Villa have only dropped from 9th to 11th. So I decided to go for Martinez as kind of the player that captured Villa's fight. But yeah, I'm not going to argue at all. Your choice to put Jack Grealish in the side. I think he's been unbelievable.
Did you know that Jack Grealish, despite being injured since mid-February, I heard this somewhere, he scored as many goals from open play as Bruno Fernandes in that time period?
I had heard that. But yeah, no, I was looking at, Premier League wide, he still leads like in the very top echelon of players for a lot of different metrics. So yeah, don't argue with that at all. I've gone for a slightly different player though. As a result, I did initially have Jack Grealish in. I decided to take him out for this player. I've gone for Mason Mount, and
okay.
The reason I've picked him is just because, again, I feel like he's been so integral to Chelsea's season. He has often looked like the brightest player on the pitch by a country mile. He has so many times been the catalyst, the spark to a lot of the good stuff that Chelsea are achieving. And I know that, since Tuchel came in, a lot of emphasis has been put on the defence. But also, the attack has been misfiring still fairly often. If we think of their attack, not many players stand out. I think Pulisic has had a couple of good games, yes. Timo Werner has had his moments, but also really had his moments that were bad. Hakim Ziyech has not done enough. They don't have a set striker at the moment. Mason Mount has really dragged Chelsea to third place, I think, and that needs to be recognised.
Yeah, I agree 100%, to the point that he is also in my team, Mason Mount, which might surprise you. It's definitely surprised me when I was thinking about this, because he is a player that I honestly never saw being in my team of the season. I think at the start of the season, I and almost everyone, I don't know about you, but I think pretty much everyone sort of had him in the same mental position as we were talking about with Luke Shaw earlier. We sort of thought, well, all these midfielders are coming in, maybe he'll play for a little bit because he used to him the most, but eventually he'll get phased out and it's all going to be about Ziyech and Kai Havertz and Timo Werner taking up those slots sort of either on the midfield or the wing. And, not only has that not happened, he has been Chelsea's best player this season. He's been the most important player. He's so important, not only in terms of goals and assists, but sort of you can see how he holds that squad together. He's a real leader despite his young age. And I think it's just really impressive to see that he's sort of overcome that. He's done it against some of the biggest teams in the league and in Europe this season. From a technical standpoint, some of the stuff he does, it's really amusing for me watching Chelsea at the moment, because I found that under Tuchel, they quite like to play the ball over the top a few times each match. And so I always find it quite amusing watching the ball drop and seeing who it drops to, because when it drops to like Kai Havertz, he's quite a big guy, so he like tries to use his body to control it, and it's quite interesting. When it goes to Timo Werner, he usually outstretches a leg and it bobbles off. When it falls to Mason Mount, his first touch is actually unbelievably good. He takes it down with either foot normally, and it's just one of those things that I always go, hang on a second. So yeah, Mason Mount has made it into my team. Despite myself, I never thought those words would come out of my mouth, but he has. Yeah,
I know you've not quite felt like he's proven himself. And he has had that kind of air about him just because Lampard did play with him at Derby and brought him up, and there would kind of talk about maybe the fact that Lampard was just playing him because he liked the lad. But just to hear manager after manager praise him and ex-player after ex-player say how impressed they are with him. And you're right with that first touch. I do just think that he does a lot of the simple game incredibly well. You'll never see him, overplay a pass. You'll never see him take a bad touch. He gets everything right in those little incremental skills. He just has down at such a young age, and he's such a talent.
He really, honestly, like, I stand, but not in the sense that, like, I just think he's got better over the course of the season as well, because last season you looked at Chelsea, and although Chelsea did pretty well, there was very much, and I think Chelsea agreed with this when they sacked Frank Lampard, that was not even necessarily an anomaly, but it was just big overperformance, and I think the whole squad had come together to achieve something like greater than the sum of their parts. I was expecting Mason Mount to have a season like Tammy Abraham was having, and he's just been so good and improved every single week to the point where now you've got to say he's a good player and he deserves to be in this team.
Well, there you go, Cam. I did not think you would have said that, but I'm glad we have more common ground. Well, my right midfielder was Kevin De Bruyne, so I will take us into striker.
So we've both gone with a lone striker. Who are you trusting to lead the line?
So, I've gone for Alexander Lacazette.
Really?
No, I'm kidding, it's Harry Kane.
I was just going to say that. Surely there's only one answer.
Yeah, it's big bad Harry Kane up top. I mean,
it's got to be,
he's
right?
top of the tables for goals and assists, and at that point, just sorry, all other strikers.
Yeah, I mean, he's just been so good this season. I think, he's the top scorer and the top assister. It's not easy to do either of those. It's extremely difficult. It's even harder to do it when you're playing for Jose Mourinho's Tottenham. I think if it's between Diaz and him for player of the season, me, really. I think the kind of difficult thing for Harry Kane, and obviously he's thinking about that a lot recently, is just that he has to basically be a one-man team a lot of the time. And the fact that they're still struggling, despite the fact that Harry Kane scored so many goals and got so many assists, kind of shows how weak a lot of the rest of the team are, because even though he's playing out of his mind, the club is like, help, please, we need to make it into the Europa League positions. So yeah, I think he's just been so good for so long in the Premier League. This is his best season yet, despite the fact that things have been in massive crisis at Spurs. And I think, if he does leave, he could go on to do some really crazy things. I think, honestly, I was thinking about it today. If he goes to Manchester United or Manchester City, I could see him breaking Alan Shearer's record in the Premier League.
I wouldn't be surprised either. Yeah, he's definitely that good. He's just so lethal, and he is so good. There are no weaknesses to his game. I think that's the main thing to say. He creates his own chances. He finishes other people's. He's good with both feet. He's strong in the air. He can dribble. He can hold up play. He can drop into midfield when he has to. He is Mr. Tottenham at the moment. And yeah, without him, they're really going to struggle.
Yeah, no, I think they definitely will. So those are our 11s. I'm quite interested that we've had a lot of similarities. We've had a lot of the same players, and I quite liked that in the midfield we sort of went for reverse each other's midfield. I went for Ndidi and Rice, and you went for Souček and Tielemans. I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, it was fun, wasn't it?
And then we've both recognised those midfields as standouts, but picked different players. I want to sort of talk about any sort of potential players that we've missed out. I had a few listed here. One of mine, obviously, was Bruno Fernandes, but I've made my point there, just basically being in the same position as De Bruyne. One of the other ones I want to talk to you about was Heung-min Son. Heung-min Son hasn't made it into my team. He also hasn't made it into yours. Why did you leave out Heung-min Son?
I think the main reason I left out Heung-min Son was because when Kane was injured and missed a few games, Son just completely failed to step up. And I think that obviously he's got some great numbers for goals and assists, but I do think that that's just because he is the closest player to Harry Kane on the pitch. And I think that he reaps those rewards a lot, which is not to say that he's not a great player, but, obviously we kind of set out what we were going to pick for our players based on, not only their individual performances, but their importance to the team. And Kane just, for me at least, eclipses Heung-min Son. And I think that you can definitely see the arguments for, the players that we picked instead of him, like Mason Mount, Kevin De Bruyne, Jack Grealish. I think they're all more important to their teams than Son.
Yeah, I think definitely I agree with what you said there about sort of his goals relying very heavily on Harry Kane. I was thinking about some of the dry runs he's got on this season. Like, for example, there was a period of 15 games between January and April where he only scored 2 goals, and several of those games were ones that were really devastating to Spurs' season. They were games that they lost or they drew that have put them in this position now. In the same sort of vein of thought as when he didn't score in those games, I looked at a lot of the games where he did score a lot of goals, and it's key to note that although he has got those big numbers, a lot of them have come in games where Spurs are filling their boots. Like he scored those 4 goals when they beat Southampton 5-2. He scored the brace when they beat United 6-1. He scored, I think it was 1 or 2 when they played Leeds 3-0 and 1 against Sheffield when they played 4-0. So my question, when we were talking earlier about sort of players that score crucial goals, Heung-min Son on paper has a lot of goals. How many of those goals have actually been, what's their worth in points to Spurs? And if they're not worth that much, how important have those goals been?
Yeah, agreed. Which is hard because it's weird to think that Spurs could have such a high-profile, quote-unquote, luxury player. But he does, yeah, I agree, he does feel a little bit like a flat-track bully at times. And maybe that's because he is a real confidence player, and only when he feels like his team's on top can he truly show his stuff. But yeah, he's had a good season. I'm excited to see more of them. I do like him as a player, despite the fact that he's had a couple of moments that I didn't like. But yeah, he's not made the team.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Not for me. The other one that is maybe the biggest omission that we haven't talked about is Mohamed Salah. Salah's currently second top scorer in the league, and lots of people are saying he should be an inclusion, but even Jamie Carragher didn't put him in, and neither have we, Rupert. Any comments on Salah and why he didn't make it in?
Yeah, look, I mean, he's got 20 goals this season, which is extremely impressive, and I can't rule out bias. You know, just the fact that Liverpool have had a bad season by their standards. So I haven't really had any Liverpool players in contention. I think that he has run very hot and cold. He had a really blistering start of the season, and then I don't think it's too much of a criticism of him to say that he hasn't done everything at Liverpool to help them win games, because Liverpool have just really, really struggled in all areas of the pitch. But I just think that compared to how good a player we know he is, I don't think he's had a very good season.
Yeah, for me, it's a lot of the same reasoning as I had for Heung-min Son, almost even more critically than for Heung-min Son, because of course Salah takes penalties. A lot of his goals have come in 1-1 draws, or they've come in games like when they lost to Leicester and they lost to Man City. Like, he gets 1 goal when they lose 3-1. And so at the end of the day, the stat sheet reads Mohamed Salah 20 goals. But again, like, what's their worth in points? So yeah, I think the fact that he's managed to get those goals, but it hasn't really done that much for Liverpool's fortunes. I suppose they could still maybe make top 4, but it's probably not going to happen. I thought good season, but didn't quite make it to team of the season. Relative to someone like, in terms of raw ability, do I think Mohamed Salah is better than Mason Mount? Sure, but Mason Mount has had a better season for a team that is doing better in the league. He's been more important to that team, who are currently above Liverpool, and so based on that rubric, he's made it in, and Salah hasn't.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. Yeah, no complaints from me. There was one player that actually kind of stood out quite a lot based on the statistics of the season, and it's maybe not someone that you would think of, but it's Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. And obviously he's been a really important axle of Tottenham's midfield, and at times, has really been the only defensive-minded midfielder at all in Tottenham. But when I was looking at kind of defensive actions, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg was at the top for a lot of them. He's made the most tackles in the whole of the Premier League. He has made the most tackles on dribblers trying to dribble past him in the league. He's made the most pressures, like the number of times applying pressure to an opposing player when receiving, carrying, or releasing the ball, of anyone in the league. So he's top in 3 really key metrics. And then what really shocked me, actually, and this I think speaks to how bad Tottenham have been, really, is that in terms of those top players, and he's at the top of the list for those metrics that I've said. He's 61st in terms of percentage of dribblers tackled. So despite having made the most number of tackles on people dribbling, he's got a really bad percentage of I think it's less than 50%, only 44.8%. So I really do think despite the fact that statistically he's been right at the top, it's because he's actually the only player doing anything in defence for Tottenham's midfield.
Yeah, and that's a great way to illustrate that point. I mean, I love stats in football. I know you do as well, but I think it's always important to view them with the right context. You can't just slap down this, like you just said there, and go, "Oh, okay, they're really good." Then, there is always a story to go along with it that can inform how you read them.
For sure. And then I think, other players that I guess worth recognising as having had good seasons. Harry Maguire's definitely ending on a strong note. John Stones, as you mentioned, has been good. For me, I would say there is still a small question mark about whether or not he's going to trip over and kick the ball into his own net. But he definitely seems to be moving in the right direction. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's had a great year. Aaron Wan-Bissaka very quietly doing a lot of good work on Manchester United's defensive right flank. Anyone else that you want to just touch on?
No, there have just been plenty of good strikers, haven't there? I think, we talk about how maybe Salah hasn't done as much as we could have thought for Liverpool. I don't even think he's necessarily been definitively their best player this season. I think Diogo Jota could have been with a shout if he'd had a little bit more game time, and maybe even has now, because the goals he has scored for the most part have been match
maybe
winners.
As well.
Fabinho's been really good in their crisis. I think there's a whole litany of strikers that have missed out just because Harry Kane is Harry Kane. Calvert-Lewin, like you mentioned. Bamford's came on in there and been really impressive. Ollie Watkins has been really impressive as well. But, none of them are going to hold a candle, unfortunately, to Harry Kane.
No, indeed. Hard to compete with the lad when he's on this kind of form.
Shall we finish? Because we're coming quite close to time and I don't think we have time for everything. So I will save my guessing game for you for next week. Shall we finish off the light little bit of useless trivia?
Let's. Well, there's one more thing that I'll just pitch your way. If we're going to end on just the trivia, who's the manager? Who manages this happy team for the league?
Go on, man. You're really going to ask me who I would say is manager of the season? Because it's not
you
based
can't say
in reality
Bielsa. You can't say
fact.
Bielsa. Or Sam Allardyce.
Well, I mean, there's two very, very obvious names at first, aren't there? There's Guardiola, because he's managing the team that won the league. But then there's also Thomas Tuchel, who has turned Chelsea from a team that were all right but disappointing to a team that is in the Champions League final and is sort of threatening to, I'm pretty sure we'll see them challenging for the league next season. So it kind of comes, which is more impressive? The Guardiola this season, building on something that he's built for the last four, or Tuchel, albeit coming in halfway through, coming out of nowhere and turning it around? I'm going to say Thomas Tuchel just because of the change that we've seen in Chelsea. There's been some really bad Chelsea football this season, and conversely, some scarily good stuff as well that actually worries me. And so based on that transition within this season, I think Man City have been brought up by Ruben Diaz, but it's not like this is the first time we've seen them look this good. So has that been, Pep's management this season, or maybe how the club has been built over the last 5-10 years? I'll say Tuchel for this time because I've been forbidden from saying Bielsa. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I rigged the dice by telling you couldn't have Bielsa. It's like showing you the ice cream shop and then telling you can't have anything.
For what it's worth, it's not just Bielsa. Last season, I would have probably said Chris Wilder was manager of the season. I as good as Liverpool were, I was quite impressed with Sheffield United doing so well. And in that same vein, I want to say Bielsa for Leeds. But fine, I'll say Tuchel.
Well, I think in that Chris Wilder vein, I guess the three that have really impressed me, I would say Dean Smith has really impressed me. Obviously, Villa have had a great year. The two I would put just a slight margin above him have been David Moyes and Brendan Rodgers. And just for the way that they have managed season and defied my expectations. And I would say that David Moyes, I've been most impressed with him just because when West Ham started the season, they had just let Dean Garner leave to West Brom, I think, and there was, Mark Noble was coming out and saying how unhappy he was with the club. There was a real sense that they just avoided relegation the season before, and there was just such negativity around them as a team, as a unit. I didn't feel like there was much cohesion, and David Moyes has just produced something really, really impressive. And the way that he's managed the side in terms of, just cultivating people, bring in new players like Jesse Lingard and Thomas Souček, and I've just been so impressed with him. Maybe that's a different metric, how impressed you've been with the manager, but I do think that you could put at least one or two other managers into Guardiola's spot at the beginning of the season, and they could still have won the league. But I don't think many managers could have done what David Moyes has done this year.
I think that's fair, and I also actually might now change mine, because I wasn't even thinking, and we talked about it for a while. I might actually change mine from Tuchel to Brendan Rodgers. I'm just thinking about how much has been made of the various injury crises around Europe this season, and how many managers have, whether it's Jurgen Klopp, who's been like such a well-liked and like seemingly down-to-earth guy for the last few years, and has suddenly come out this season every 5 minutes with the wind was too strong, and the grass wasn't cut properly. Brendan Rodgers, at least from what I've seen, has kind of just knuckled down with it and got on and taken Leicester to a top 4 finish, despite the fact that, as you said, they have had more injuries than Liverpool. So yeah, based on that, the ability to recognise which players to promote in the squad, I'm gonna change horses to Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah, I think very fair. There was one reason why I didn't go with Brendan Rodgers, and that is just because I worry that his old weakness is starting to rear its head. They've dropped back down to 4th place from 3rd, and I do worry that, I don't think they're at risk of dropping out of the top 4, but I do think that Leicester might be at risk of just having a slight dip towards the end of the season, as is his wont.
Yeah, that's definitely the Rodgers trademark. I suppose, actually, realistically, if we're talking about just Premier League, these are answers. I think ultimately the question will be answered based on who wins the Champions League. I think if Guardiola finally wins it for City, then it's got to be him. And if Tuchel wins it for Chelsea, after coming in with like half a season, it's got to be him. There's still a few more games to play. And, it's not like you said with Leicester. Leicester could lose the next 3 games of the season and have a real shocker, as is Rodgers won. But for now, Rodgers for me and Moyes for you.
Very nice. Yes, useless trivia.
Finishing us off with the useless trivia. Mine's actually quite relevant because we were just talking about managers, and we talk about managers a lot of the time that overstay their welcome, and others that given enough time. But how about the manager that was relieved of his duties quicker than any other in English football? Leroy Rosenjahr, father of Liam, a famous Hull player, managed several teams in his nascent managerial career, including a spell as manager of Torquay United between 2002 and 2006. After leaving to manage Brentford, Torquay appointed their old manager again on the 17th of May 2007, but just minutes later were bought by a local consortium who installed a chief executive that wanted a different manager. This meant that Rosenjahr's second spell as Torquay manager lasted just 600 seconds, a record for quickest sacking. Since that swift dismissal, he hasn't again worked as a manager.
600 seconds. I mean, how do you apply to that? How do you get yourself back up under the horse and apply for another job after getting fired?
He just decided not to.
He just hasn't. Wow, that is. I mean, it's a big one to try and come back from, and yeah, he hasn't. But
oh yeah,
that is indeed a good one. Yeah, that's a good one because I also have decided to take my useless trivia in a slightly different direction as normal. I think I've really tried to reflect and think, what is useless trivia? Because a lot of the trivia that we come up with, I think, is quite fun. What's actually horribly... I don't even want to bring it up again, or I'm going to forget it. What's useless? And so my piece of information for you this week, Cameron, is that James Milner's birth flower is a carnation.
Well, there you go. That is truly the most useless of useless trivias.
That's for you. That's just for you.
Thank you, Carly. And our carnation will be for James Milner. Well, I think we had a lot we wanted to discuss. We wanted to discuss European semi-finals. We wanted to discuss the sides that have gone down and which might come up. But we're out of time. So, Rupert, great to talk to you as always.
Cam, thank you. And thank you to everyone at home for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Cheers, guys. Bye.